Charles Oliveira is arguably the greatest UFC fighter of current times. Riding on a record 11 glorious bout winning streak, he's become a formidable force whose mere presence in the ring is enough to scare the daylights out of his opponents. Oliveira's current run has become extraordinary, finishing opponents left and right en route to reclaiming the title. In today's video, we'll talk about the real reason we think no one will ever beat him. First things first, why the Brazilian star dominates every fight. Charles Oliveira's last loss came in December 2017 when he was defeated by Paul Felder via second-round TKO. This was his fourth defeat in a six-fight stretch. He had missed weight 4 times in the previous 5 years and began his UFC career with a mediocre 10-8 record with 1 no contest. No one would have believed you had you told them back in 2017 that Oliveira wouldn't lose another bout and would eventually go on to fight for a UFC title several years later. Honestly, anyone's immediate reaction would have been, no way. Of course, if we're being honest, none of us would have thought otherwise. Fast forward years later, today, Charles Oliveira is a force to be reckoned with in the UFC's lightweight division. While he is young, he's still a veteran when it comes to fighting experience. At 32, you get the sense he hasn't even come close to peaking and will definitely be a force for a long time. He joined the UFC at the age of 20 and has since fought the world's best fighters. It's not been easy though, as the Brazilian has experienced his fair share of ups and downs in his early UFC career. He had a UFC record of 10-8-1 from his debut in 2010 to his last loss in 2017. Oliveira then went on an 11-fight winning streak after his last defeat to Paul Felder in May 2022. During those 11 fights, he would go on to win the UFC lightweight title against Michael Chandler and defend it against a household name like Dustin Poirier. While he was stripped of his title for being a half a pound over the weight limit, he still went on to finish Justin Gaethje in the first round via submission. It's this absolute dedication and faith in himself that keeps Oliveira going. Man's a beast in the ring. He's aggressive, smart, and mindful of his strategies and his opponent's moves, almost like a predator eyeing his prey before making the right move. So, what makes Oliveira so special? As a UFC fan, you've probably heard the phrase, "style makes fights." Every fighter who has entered the ring or octagon has developed their own style by combining various disciplines such as boxing, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and wrestling. Fighting styles are key in a fight because they decide the approach the fighters will take. Let's say Oliveira is packed with an excellent style that not many can mimic. It takes a special type of fighter to finish, let alone win, against the top 3 lightweights, including Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler, and Dustin Poirier. Let's look at how he finishes his opponents, for example. Oliveira's bread and butter is the submission game, as he transitions incredibly well on the ground. The Brazilian is a BJJ third-degree black belt with the most submissions in the UFC, so it comes as no surprise that Oliveira is out for blood when the fight is brought to the ground. He proved this against Kevin Lee, a formidable grappler. He also proved his BJJ skill when he dominated Tony Ferguson on the ground. You can say that Oliveira is arguably one of the best submission artists in the UFC, which makes it next to impossible to beat him. Not to mention, his ground game is outstanding, but he still doesn't prefer it. He likes to mix it up with striking, and he's no slouch when it comes to stand-up. After graduating from the Shoot Boxing Academy, Oliveira has adopted an aggressive style of kickboxing that relies heavily on forward pressure. Despite not being known for having heavy hands, he's knocked out fighters such as Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje. And even though he was dropped twice during the Gaethje fight, Oliveira was not afraid to trade in the pocket. How many current fighters are capable of pulling this off? Not many. Also, he's quite a well-rounded fighter. He's one of the few who still possess an elite ground game that not many people in the UFC have. When Oliveira is dropped or is in trouble, he can easily take it to the ground. Most fighters who drop their opponent in the octagon like to follow up with ground and pound shots, which makes Charles's bait ideal for getting his opponents to engage in grappling. Some fans believe Oliveira even dropped on purpose during this fight with Gaethje in order to force him to the ground. His striking is on par with the best in the UFC, but his ground game is leagues ahead of most in his division. But his BJJ is practically another lifeline. It's no longer 1996, so we can safely assume that every fighter at the top levels of the UFC is familiar with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Not only that, but they quite clearly understand how it works. Most of them regularly practice grappling on the floor and are very high-level pros themselves. Despite this, Charles Oliveira has plowed through the entire UFC lightweight division and has by far the most submissions in the promotion's history, and he's nowhere near the end of his career, so expect a lot more of it. Oliveira manages to make them tap despite not fighting cans. And don't even get us started on his own submission defense. One constantly overlooked aspect of Oliveira's BJJ BJJ is his own submission defense. While he has been tapped 3 times in his career, the last one was in 2016. On the ground, Oliveira is a shaky fighter who frequently gives his back to opponents. This is certainly not a good thing because anyone who watches or trains MMA knows that this is a place where you can easily be choked and offer no offense. Despite this though, Oliveira's defense is so strong that he has never tapped to a rear naked choke, even when he's in a seemingly hopeless position. He's commonly able to pass into better positions and get the best of his opponents from the top by extending fights and easily shrugging off both triangle and armbar attacks. As a result, Oliveira gives himself the best chance of gaining a submission of his own by not being tapped while keeping the fight on the ground. Also, there's relatively little ground and pound in his play. Charles Oliveira throws fewer strikes from positions such as mount and side control than almost every other UFC fighter. It's not that he doesn't intend to win fights through ground and pound, but his approach is quite unusual compared to others of his caliber. When in mount or passing guard, Oliveira doesn't favor a high posture. Because of his low head positioning, he makes himself more vulnerable to guillotine chokes and does not allow himself enough distance to throw strikes. But there are a number of positives that stem from this low-pressure style of passing guards. For starters, because Oliveira is always so close to the opponent on the ground, the opponent has no chance of recovering to a standing position. Secondly, despite his inability to throw many strikes, he's able to advance his positioning on the body and control the fight. To sum up, Oliveira gives up very little ground in order to attack his opponent with a series of submissions instead, and his chaining submission attempts are out of this world. Anyone who has trained BJJ past the blue belt level will know that chaining submission attempts together is an important part of getting submissions in the sport. While you can set up a single attempt and get it the first time, doing so against seasoned opponents can be kind of tricky because they know what's coming next. By chaining attacks together, the opponent is forced to defend against too many things at once until they're overwhelmed and have no defense left. This is somewhat simple to do in BJJ, but requires a completely different level of skill in MMA. Many of Oliveira's submissions happen while he's being punched in the face repeatedly by an opponent. Throwing up one submission attack after another from the bottom is obviously difficult under such pressure and is not something many fighters want to attempt. The relentlessness of Oliveira's attacks allows him to stop opponents, rather than choosing to push the opponent away and return to a stand-up position. And last but not the least, he's an absolute treat to watch. What we like about Oliveira is that he's a fascinating fighter to watch. He's a stronger finisher in fights and isn't afraid to brawl. He finished his 2021 fights and his first 2020 fight after nearly finishing himself. He was dropped by Chandler and was on the verge of losing the fight until the bell rang. He went on to TKO Chandler in the second round. We also saw Dustin drop Oliveira and injure him before submitting via a rear naked choke. And then during the Gaethje fight, the same thing happened. He thrives at capitalizing immediately following a barrage of attacks. Oliveira can really hang in there among fire and has proved time and again that he isn't easily defeated. And we're sure it'll take someone super strong and skilled to finally put this big man out. And that's a wrap for this video. Do you think Charles Oliveira will lose his winning streak sometime soon, or is he going to remain undefeatable? Comment below and let us know. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more. See you in the next one.